Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us early this morning or this afternoon, depending on where you're coming from. Just to give you a little bit of an idea of what's coming at you today, we really are talking about security as well as availability and performance and resilience in managed file transfer, specifically what we've introduced to MOVEit and what is coming to MOVEit very soon. So I'll be letting our incredible presenters actually go over that today, but I'll be passing it over first to John, who will be able to talk to you about specifically what's been introduced into MOVEit and what is coming soon and that strategic direction. And then I'm also joined by Andrew, who is a complete expert in web application firewalls and is really just going to break it down for us. What is it and why does it matter? So with that, I'll go ahead and pass it over to them for you.
Super. Thanks, Rachel. So external threat actors are really a significant concern. They account for 81% of data breaches, and the statistic really underscores the urgency and the need for organizations to adopt comprehensive security measures. As we discuss this, consider the implications for your organization and the potential vulnerabilities that may exist. And understanding the scale of this issue is really the first step in, being able to fortify our defenses against these threats. Last year, the average cost of a data breach reached an all-time high of approximately $4.9 million, which represents a 10% increase over the year prior. And in addition to these costs, there's also the cost of lost business and any kind of post-breach responses that are needed, and those are also growing over 10% per year. We're also seeing that artificial intelligence, which is certainly on, the tip of everyone's tongue in the technology space, is being leveraged extensively by threat actors. And so we expect to see the frequency and cost of data breaches continuing to rise as it becomes easier for them to be able to execute these exploits. These increasing threats, businesses must evolve their security strategies. Organizations not only need to adapt and strengthen their defenses, but it really is crucial that they recognize that static security measures are just really not sufficient any longer, and that a much more proactive approach is necessary to safeguard sensitive data and to maintain operational integrity. Managed file transfer is viewed by threat actors, unfortunately, as a high-value target, and so that makes this, even more crucial for customers. So a web application firewall is positioned as a vital tool in our security arsenal. It helps customers meet compliance requirements more easily. It can help you safeguard your files from malicious actors and simplifies the management and administration of the deployment of a web application firewall. We're going to look into some of these benefits and how implementing a web application firewall, also referred to as a WAF, can streamline your security processes and enhance your overall data protection strategy. Any business that accepts, transmits, or stores cardholder data must be PCI compliant. And in PCI DSS 4.0, a web application firewall became a mandatory requirement. It's really crucial for protecting web applications from the various threats, especially client-side attacks. And the requirement 6.4.2, is really where this became mandatory. And the requirement really aims at enhancing the security by filtering and blocking malicious content before it ever reaches the application server. Now, you may not need to meet PCI compliance requirements within your organization, but the need to protect your data is really just as critical. MOVEit WAF has been specifically tailored to meet the unique needs of managed file transfer users like yourselves, and really provides the ease of use in deployment and in management that our users expect. I'll now turn the presentation over to Andrew, and he's going to provide a lot more detail about how MOVEit WAF can help safeguard your environment.
Awesome. Thanks very much, John. So I'd like to talk a little bit today about what is a WAF, I'd also like to talk about how does a WAF work, and also cover who needs to have a WAF. So as mentioned, WAF stands for Web Application Firewall, and a WAF is a network security appliance. Specifically, a WAF sits on the network between the clients on one side and the servers and the infrastructure on the other side. So by sitting in the middle of the network in this privileged position, a WAF is able to monitor the flow of web traffic. And by doing so, a WAF is also able to detect and proactively block malicious seeming traffic. So if we apply this to the context of MOVEit, let's imagine that I have a MOVEit deployment and I have some end users who want to perform file transfers using my MOVEit deployment. So on the one side, I have my users, and on the other side, I have my MOVEit servers, my infrastructure. So the vast majority of my users are going to be genuine, legitimate users who want to make legitimate use of the MOVEit file transfer services I'm offering. However, there's inevitably going to be a very small percentage of users, and a small percentage of traffic is going to be coming in from attackers. So these are individuals and organizations that want to intentionally send malformed and malicious traffic to my MOVEit server. So what I can do to try and protect against this threat of attack, I can put a WAF into the mix. So I put a WAF in between my users and my servers, and the WAF sits in the middle. And again, the WAF, it's monitoring that flow of web traffic, and it's detecting and proactively blocking traffic that looks malicious, traffic that looks like it could be bad. So that bad attacking traffic is blocked and it's stopped in its tracks before it ever manages to make its way to my back-end MOVEit servers. And by doing this, I'm increasing the security of my MOVEit deployment. I'm allowing genuine users to continue to connect through and to use my MOVEit services, but I'm also blocking traffic from attackers. I like to use the analogy that a WAF is like a suit of armor. If I put on a suit of armor, it's giving me a layer of defense. Now, by wearing armor, that doesn't make me invincible. Armor isn't a perfect defensive solution, but if you find yourself on the receiving end of something sharp and pointy, you're going to be very grateful to have that additional layer of defense that wearing a suit of armor will provide. And a WAF is very similar. A WAF is not a perfect defensive solution, but a WAF gives you an extra layer of defense. And in a real-world deployment, a WAF is one of many such layers of defense. So in the context of cybersecurity, we talk about what's called defense in depth. And defense in depth is the concept that says if we have something that we want to make sure is as secure as possible, the best way to secure it is to use multiple independent layers of defense. So if one or more of our defensive layers should become compromised, there are still multiple additional layers of security actively providing defense for me. So again, if we apply this to the context of MOVEit, there's a good chance that we're dealing with confidential information, maybe healthcare or financial information. So we want to go as far as we can to keep that information as secure as we can possibly make it. So we do that by using these multiple independent layers of defense. And a WAF is one such layer of defense. And again, what the WAF is doing, it's monitoring that flow of web traffic, it's blocking the malicious bad traffic, and by doing that, by having a WAF in the mix, we're raising the bar of security for our MOVEit infrastructure. We're making it more difficult to attack our MOVEit instance. So inevitably, when an attacker comes along and they try their luck against our MOVEit infrastructure, they're going to run headfirst into our WAF layer. The WAF is going to make their lives more difficult, and eventually the attacker is going to move on in search of a softer target, in search of an easier time, potentially in search of someone who doesn't have that WAF security layer in place. So I'd like to give you a little peek under the hood of a WAF, and I'd like to share a few technical details. Specifically, I'm going to call out some of the component parts that make up a WAF, which will help to describe some of the capabilities and functionality that a WAF has. So at the core of a WAF, we have what's called the engine. The engine is what powers the WAF. And what the engine does is it ingests and it passes HTTP web traffic. Once the engine has passed that web traffic and it's made sense of the web traffic, it turns it into groups of variables. And we can then go ahead and inspect those variables. So to give you an example, we have variables that represent the request headers of the web traffic. We have variables that represent the query string arguments and any bits of user submitted data, so we can inspect that as well. And web traffic, it can be quite diverse, and indeed HTTP is made up of a broad set of standards. So the engine also needs to be able to understand things like user submitted form data, multi-part requests and file uploads, and if we're talking about APIs and web services, we also need to think about things like JSON requests, XML requests. So the engine, it needs to be able to understand this broad set of different inputs, and it needs to be able to make sense of all of this slightly different kinds of web traffic. So once the engine has created these variables and it's done this parsing and it's understood the traffic, it then needs to give us some tools with which we can inspect that traffic. So for example, we might want to see how large or how small are different bits of the traffic. If something is much, much larger or much smaller than we're expecting to see, that could be an indication that something isn't quite right. Also, we can do pattern matching. So we can run things like regular expressions to look for known bad, malicious behaviors. And also we can perform some validation on the input that we're seeing to make sure that the user submitted data we're seeing aligns with what we're expecting to see. So we have the WAF engine that's, again, it's ingesting that web traffic, it's making sense of the traffic and giving us some tools to inspect it with. But the engine doesn't do much by itself. We need to give the engine some instructions. We need to tell it what to do and how to behave. So that's where the second component part of a WAF enters the picture, and that's the rules. So WAF rules are the logic that we provide to the engine to tell it how it can perform some meaningful inspection of our web traffic. So you can go ahead and you can write your own set of rules if you want to, but it's usually much, much easier to repurpose and to use a pre-existing set of WAF rules. Now, the best example of WAF rules is what's called OWASP CRS. CRS is the de facto industry standard set of WAF rules. CRS is developed and published as a free and open source software project by the well-respected OWASP Foundation, who you may be familiar with. What CRS is, it's a set of generic WAF detection rules. It looks for things that seem to be unusual or anomalous or malicious seeming behaviors. So for example, we have rules that look for snippets of JavaScript or SQL queries where they shouldn't be. Those will be detected by the rules, they'll be flagged, and that traffic will be blocked. Or alternatively, we check for things like, is the web traffic well formed, or are there HTTP level protocol violations? Those will be detected by the rules, flagged, and potentially blocked as well. So when we're adding these detection rules into the mix, we're increasing the security of our websites and our web applications. However, there's a downside to that, and the downside these rules bring is the potential for false positives. So when legitimate, genuine traffic causes some of these rules to match in error, that's what we call a false positive. And false positives bring a number of problems. So if you imagine that you're trying to legitimately use a website or a web service and you keep running into error messages and they're caused by false positives on a WAF, well, that's really frustrating because if you're constantly bumping into errors that are preventing you from doing what you want and what you need to do, that's a really frustrating experience. So if you have false positives, they can create a poor user experience. Another problem is that if you have a WAF and it's creating a constant stream of alerts due to false positives, there's a risk that the security and operations teams are going to be inclined to start ignoring these constant alerts and these constant false positives. So if you have lots of false alarms due to false positives, there's a real possibility and a risk that the real attacks are going to be lost in the background noise of all of those false positives. And last but not least, it's possible that false positives can be caused by user-submitted data, for example, passwords, addresses, and when the WAF logs these alert messages, they will contain the offending information. So they'll contain these passwords and these addresses and usernames and things. So those alerts will be recorded to a log file on the WAF. And that's a problem from a compliance perspective if you're writing this user information, these passwords, and potentially personally identifiable information. If you're logging that in these WAF alerts, that's a compliance issue. So there are plenty of reasons why false positives can be disruptive and why they're generally seen as a nuisance. So we need to make sure that we remedy these false positives. So when a WAF rule causes a false positive to occur, we need to resolve that false positive. And we do that by modifying the rule that causes the issue. And we refer to that as tuning the rule. And we tune a rule by looking at what's causing the false positive to occur. And once we understand why the false positive is occurring, we can then go ahead and provide additional instructions to the WAF to modify its behavior and to make sure that that issue is prevented from reoccurring in the future. Now, when we're setting up a WAF, this rule tuning process can take a significant amount of time. The way that we do that is typically we thoroughly test the web application once the WAF has been placed in front of it. We test the application, we go through the logs and we find all of those false positives. We tune them away once we understand why they're occurring, and then we repeat the process. Once we've tuned away the false positives, we do some more testing, we continue to look at the logs, and we repeat the process until we're satisfied and we're confident that we've tuned away the false positives and we have the WAF configured appropriately. That takes a lot of time to go through that process. It also takes a lot of knowledge and a lot of experience to be able to do this. And that could take the form of taking on some consultancy, which can be quite expensive, or new hires specifically to our security team to do this. Again, that can be quite an expensive process. Or training and upskilling our existing security staff, which can take a lot of time as well. And once we've done that, we also need to train our staff and our operations engineers so that they can continue to maintain and operate the WAF on an ongoing basis. So the problem with tuning a WAF is it's not a one and done situation. Unfortunately, it's a continuing process. So once we have it tuned and configured how we want it, it may be a possibility that we add new rules in the future. Well, those new rules will need to be tuned. Or the web application, it might be updated, new features get added. That may bring false positives with it as well. So we need to continually update and tune our WAF configuration over time. So when you think of this all in all, it can add up to a fairly significant investment in terms of time and resources. And that can also lead to quite a large time to value when we're adding a WAF in place. It can take quite a lot of time before we really start realizing the value of the security that the WAF brings to the table. It can take a long time to get to a place where we're comfortable with the WAF. So I want to talk a bit about the OWASP Top 10. You may be familiar with the Top 10. It's an awareness document published by the OWASP Foundation. And the OWASP Top 10 lists the 10 most critical security risks that are faced by web applications today. And it gives us some of the categories that a WAF needs to defend against. These 10 categories and others amongst this as well. And one of the classic attack vectors that WAFs are very good at detecting and defending against is injection attack. So an injection attack is when an attacker submits a malicious input to a web application. And that may take the form of a snippet of malicious code that an attacker will try and insert into a text box, like you can see in this example here in the middle of the page. And if the web application is vulnerable to this type of injection attack, that can be very, very bad for us. So an attacker may be able to bypass the access controls of the web application. So they may be able to do things that would otherwise require a valid account to do. They may be able to gain access to sensitive information, and they may even, in the worst case scenario, be able to gain administrative access to our web application. Now, if a web application firewall is put in front of a web application, the WAF will probably be able to detect such a rogue snippet of code being submitted by a malicious attacker. And an example like this would set off several WAF detection rules and would cause this to be blocked. So this kind of attack would typically be blocked by a WAF before it was ever able to make its way to the back-end web application. Now, the vast majority of modern web application frameworks will protect you from this kind of injection attack by default. But regardless of whether the application is securely written or not, whether it's vulnerable or not, if you have a WAF in place, the WAF will proactively block and stop this kind of malicious input before it ever manages to make its way to the back-end application servers. So in the context of managed file transfer, do you need a WAF? Well, first of all, as John touched on earlier, if you need to comply with PCI DSS 4, then yes, according to the standard, you do need a WAF. That is a requirement. If you're transferring files using HTTP, then you should also seriously consider putting a WAF in place to secure your web traffic. And that includes if we're running things like APIs and we're exposing API services to our end users, you need to secure that kind of traffic as well. And lastly, if you're in a situation where you cannot afford downtime caused by a potential attack, then you should seriously consider putting a WAF in place to have that additional layer of defense against attacks that could cause service disruption. And to come back to PCI DSS again, it's a specific security standard regarding credit card information, and the current version of the standard introduced some changes. So specifically the requirement that says that you must protect your websites and web applications from attack, that requirement was changed. So previously it stated it was optional to use a WAF to protect your web apps and your web services. That's no longer the case. It is now a mandatory requirement to have a WAF in place. So if you require to be compliant and to remain compliant with PCI DSS, then yes, you must have a WAF in place to protect your web applications and to protect your web services. So with that said, I will now hand it back over to John.
Thanks, Andrew. That was really some great information. So our MOVEit Cloud customers have actually been benefiting from the added protection of MOVEit WAF since earlier this year. And we're seeing over 1 million requests each day that are being scanned. And within those requests, we are identifying thousands of unwanted requests, which then in turn are being blocked by the rules that we have in place. As a PCI compliant SaaS solution, deploying a WAF was a requirement for MOVEit Cloud when the PCI standard made it mandatory. And as Andrew noted earlier, a WAF decrypts HTTP traffic to inspect the data for malicious content before re-encrypting and sending to MOVEit. In our deployment, the encrypted SFTP and FTPS traffic is routed directly to MOVEit Cloud and is not able to be decrypted by a WAF by design. This was one of the unique requirements that made deployment of a WAF challenging for managed file transfer deployments like MOVEit Cloud and MOVEit Transfer that typically need to be able to support these multiple encrypted protocols. One of the things that we did was to develop a set of WAF rules specifically tailored for MOVEit with the types of valid requests that a WAF should allow to pass. Now, this was subjected to months of testing, and we used what we learned by inspecting the logs to identify and resolve any false positives that were blocking any legitimate traffic. So we're going to be announcing very soon a MOVEit WAF solution that is going to be available for our on-premises customers. Given that on-premises deployments have the same security challenges as our MOVEit Cloud offering, we're going to be making MOVEit WAF available for deployment in your environment. The same requirements that made MOVEit WAF really the best solution for MOVEit Cloud also make it the best option for deployment in front of your MOVEit Transfer servers. Another key requirement was the ability to support MOVEit Transfer web farms. MOVEit WAF not only provides web application firewall capabilities, but is also a fully featured load balancer. With proven support for the kind of large-scale multi-node web farm deployments that we have with MOVEit Cloud, we're really confident that MOVEit WAF can handle your workloads with ease. The MOVEit WAF solution can provide you with many key benefits, mitigating risk and improving file transfer resiliency among them. The solution really allows you to address the critical security concerns while also being easy to deploy and administer. The key features that a MOVEit WAF solution delivers is really critical. The whole concept of layered defense is really the best protection against threat actors, and doing this by detecting anomalous behavior is one of the key capabilities. And the enhancements that we made to the rule set to deal with the specific details that managed file transfer customers have is really a big benefit for customers implementing this, as opposed to a more generic solution where they have to build all those rules. We've had discussions with customers that have spent, months, many months going through the rule definition and testing process, and it really is costly and labor intensive and requires a skill set that, many customers may not possess. The OWASP top 10 coverage, this really, is taking that industry standard framework and allowing the WAF to apply that in addition to any custom rules that need to be defined. So as I noted, MOVEit WAF can be deployed in a web farm architecture that delivers, high availability and really is essential for mission critical applications like MOVEit Transfer. As we noted earlier, we provide predefined MOVEit specific rules that have been developed by experts and really subjected to really rigorous testing. And as I noted earlier, we're seeing over 1 million HTTP requests coming in daily into our MOVEit Cloud environment. And so operating at that scale, you get to see a lot of different, type of data to be able to ensure that your rules have been configured properly. Now, that being said, customers do have the ability to tailor the rules for their specific security requirements. And so while we're going to deliver you with very robust out-of-the-box settings, you can also modify them and do so with great ease. So to just kind of summarize, why MOVEit WAF over other WAF load balancers would be the best choice for your MOVEit Transfer environments, it's really to allow you to consolidate and simplify your infrastructure. We want to be able to eliminate the complexity of managing multiple vendors by centralizing not only the managed file transfer application, but also the web application firewall and load balancing capabilities with a single vendor solution, allowing the technical teams at your end to have to interact with multiple teams really just makes it very challenging to try and identify where the source of a problem is and what the appropriate resolution may be to that. As Andrew noted earlier, we want to make sure that you can accelerate time to value. And so by eliminating the manual configuration requirements and testing that you would normally have to do with a generic WAF will greatly speed up your deployment time. And, we want to try and get our customers to be able to deploy these types of solutions, instead of in weeks or months, but be able to Tiger team of senior engineers or consultants that have the expertise with WAF technology, rule sets, and engines, and adding MOVEit Transfer expertise and testing just adds an additional layer of cost and complexity to that. This solution is definitely built for MFT. And so some of the products that we had investigated when we were first doing our research into what we would potentially deploy for MOVEit Cloud, we found that some solutions just completely block SFTP and FTPS traffic and don't allow it through at all. And so the solution that we have come up with does allow for the seamless routing of SFTP and FTPS traffic around the WAF, understanding that WAFs are built specifically to just decrypt and inspect HTTP traffic. And the support options that the MOVEit team can offer you will help reduce finger pointing across the differing technologies in the tech stack and really allow you to get answers to whatever issues you're having more quickly. At the end of the day, we know that customers use MOVEit in production environments, so keeping files moving is really critical to their business operations. And so we have a solution that can perform these inspections very rapidly with very large amounts of incoming HTTP requests that are coming in, and not having to rely, for example, on a cloud-based deployment that could be, thousands of miles away from where your servers are located. Helps reduce latency and just make sure that we're maximizing performance. And as I noted earlier, given that we do have, the ability to deploy MOVEit Transfer in an active web farm configuration, needs to be able to support that kind of capability. At the end of the day, it's all about reduction of risk. And MOVEit is currently the only file transfer solution that offers a predefined specialized web application firewall for on-premises based deployments. And we understand that reducing the risk of compliance fines, for transferring credit card data, PCI data, or other sensitive data is really critical in our customers' environments. And this provides you with that additional layer of defense. And at the end of the day, detecting anomalous behaviors needs to be flexible. And so we provide you with those capabilities so that as threat actors evolve and the landscape changes, you're able to make modifications to continue to provide those types of protections. So at the end of the day, MOVEit WAF really is focused on risk reduction, avoiding fines, and saving time. Each of these benefits is critical for organizations that are looking to enhance their security posture while maintaining compliance. And I just want to thank you for joining us today. And now I'll turn you back over to Rachel for some closing remarks.
Awesome. Thank you so much, John. That was incredible. Both John and Andrew, super insightful of what a WAF is, what's coming soon to MOVEit. And with that, if you are interested in having a conversation with our team or reach out to your account manager directly, we're more than happy to assist with any questions that you have, talk about any security strategies or overall resiliency and availability programs you have for the rest of the year or going into next year. So more than happy to get those conversations scheduled. But again, thank you so much for joining us today, learning a little bit more about what has been released recently in MOVEit and what is to come, and expect many more webinars like this in the future from our product team.